Ladies, gentlemen, welcome to my honest take on another watch, the Bremont ALT1-ZT 51. Now I'm going to be taking you through my honest take on this watch and essentially what it's like to live with and wear on a daily basis. I will also be going over what I like and dislike about the watch. So let's get right into it. So I've owned this watch for just under a year now, so I've had plenty of time to play with it and wear it, and I have indeed done that. I've worn it on a daily basis for prolonged periods of time, and so I'm going to be sharing with you what that's been like. So let's kick it off with a few quick specifications. I'm not a huge tech watch person, but I've got some basic specs here for you. The movement inside this thing is what Bremont called a caliber 13 BE54AE automatic chronometer, and I think the important part about this when it comes to your daily usage is that it's got a 42-hour power reserve. Now, because I own many other different watches, sometimes the 42-hour power reserve isn't quite enough for me. I know there are some automatic watches out there on the market that have got longer power reserves, so that's one thing that I would quite like to have had a little bit more of, which is the power reserve. 42 hours is by no means nothing or little. It's definitely good. It's just that I happen to have a few watches that I like to rotate, and so 42 is a little bit short as far as I'm concerned. What else? In terms of the functions, it's got a few different ones which I'm a huge fan of. So namely, we've got our chronometer. So you've got your start pusher here, and then you use that same pusher to stop the chrono, and then you've got your reset button here at the bottom. Now I find the chrono function super useful. I work in the fitness industry and I find myself having to time things all the time, and then whenever I'm at home I pretty much use the chrono to time how long my tea's been brewing. So really useful function if you find yourself out and about having to time stuff. So a good function as far as I'm concerned, fits in with my line of work and sees a decent amount of daily usage. So if you need a chrono, you've got one, and it works really well, and I really like that feature. Something else we've got, which might be a small detail but I think would be a make or break for me, it's got a date window. I love having the date on the watch. Just being able to quickly glance down at the watch and check what day it is I find really useful, so I pretty much use that on a daily basis and love it. Moving on, it's got another neat function, which is, as you can see here, the GMT hand, and this of course allows you to track a second time zone, which again for me is very useful because I find myself on the road quite often, and that way I don't have to keep setting my watch and the time on it every single time I leave the country. So that GMT function is another huge winner for me. So all in all, I find this watch to be a sort of a great do-it-all. It's got 100 meters of water resistance, so if you leave it on your wrist when you're going for a swim at the pool or a dip in the sea, it'll come out of that alive as well. So all in all, in terms of the functionality of this watch, yeah, for me it's a winner. If you don't use watches as in such a functional way and they're more of an accessory, definitely maybe a bit overkill, but that's the functions. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the size and what it's like to wear. So this thing has a 43mm case diameter, that's excluding all of the pushers and the crowns, which, if you know, depending on who you ask, is quite big. Now I personally don't have a problem with it. I quite like my watches to have a good amount of wrist presence and a good feel on the wrist. I also happen to have a 7-inch wrist, so let's pop this on. And so for me it doesn't really feel too big. You see the lugs, let me just pop this on real quick. So you can see the lugs of the watch don't overshadow my wrist when I'm wearing it, which I find would be the benchmark for whether something's too big. If the lugs here sort of overshadow the wrist, that would probably be a sign to me that the watch is too big. Now that's just personal preference. I'm just sort of coming out with this out of my own head. But yeah, so size could be a factor if you don't like a big watch, although I don't find it wears incredibly huge. But of course that depends on your wrist size. What else? In terms of the looks, it comes with this really thick dark brown leather strap, which to be honest at the beginning was very hard, didn't have much flex, and it made the watch sit quite funny on my wrist, and I wasn't a fan of it at the beginning, but as I wore it, it sort of molded into the shape of my wrist, and now I find it actually fits really nicely, and it sort of goes well with sort of Bremont's tool watch-esque sort of brand and vibe. You know, you've got quite a thick case as well. I don't know how thick the case is, but it is also quite tall, and I find the strap sort of complements the whole package really well. I personally like it, but again, I know that some people have said they find the strap a little bit too big and thick on these, too imposing, which isn't really a problem. You could always swap this thing out. I think this thing would probably look quite good on a NATO strap as well. Even a sort of a thinner, maybe stitched brown leather strap would look great on this as well. So all in all, in terms of the looks, a great package. Now, one thing that was this really small detail that I would have maybe liked is you see the seconds dial here on the left of the dial. I would have quite liked that to be a protruding dial, as you can see, a little bit like the other dials are. Not necessarily white, although could have looked great in white. I would have just liked for that seconds dial to protrude. However, it sort of sits flush and is part of the sort of the dial. That's one little detail about this that yeah, that I would have preferred another way. Other than that, I think the watch looks incredibly good. I really like the overall package, the look, the color of the lume, the contrast of the dials. I find it really legible. I feel like the hands are a good length. That GMT hand is super accurate. I find it sits well out of the way. Yeah, the numbers on the roto click bezel also are a good size. I find the whole package to just sort of come together really well. But yeah, again, that's sort of personal taste. Now over here, we've got what Bremont calls their roto click bezel, which I believe you can hear. And every time you rotate this and it gets to a marker, it sort of sits and clicks into place. It's quite satisfying to use. And this thing, you can use it to track a third time zone as well. So another function that Bremont have managed to sort of pack into this thing, which is great. I find good. On the back here, we've got an exhibition case back, and you can see sort of their movement. Yeah, just a lovely touch. It's quite nice to be able to just look in there and see the hairspring working and the rotor. So yeah, overall, looks-wise, really pleased with this package. So just to conclude, I've been living with this thing for just under a year, and let's talk about maybe things that are sort of contentious or controversial. I know that this doesn't have an in-house movement, I don't believe, so it's not Bremont's own movement. I think they've used a modified off-the-shelf movement. However, as far as I'm concerned, the movement they've used is a tried and tested movement that's got a really good rep in the sort of the watch industry for being very robust and for being very readily available for replacements and spare parts and all that stuff. So if you're gonna get, you can probably get this serviced anywhere you like, really, and I imagine it won't be a problem. So I don't particularly have an issue with the fact that this doesn't have an in-house movement. that's not something that is a deal breaker for me. I'm quite happy for it to have any old off-the-shelf movement that's been tried and tested, so long as it has been tried and tested, and this one certainly has, as far as I'm concerned. From what I've heard other reviewers say about the BE movement that this has. What else? The watch is quite heavy, which again, personally, is not something I have a problem with. I quite like to, feel the watch on the wrist and feel like I have something on there. So for me, it's not a problem, but I know that some people perhaps don't like that as much. So let's pop it on the wrist once again, because I know when I watch these things, I want to see it on the wrist. And here it is on the wrist. I haven't fully done up the buckle, but this is what it looks like. So you see the leather strap is indeed quite thick, but I think it sits really nicely on the wrist. Isn't too tall or imposing, and yeah, I really like this watch. I've really been enjoying wearing it, and as far as I'm concerned, this whole package is a winner. Now, full disclosure, I'm not paid or sponsored in any way, shape or form by Bremont. They have absolutely no idea who I am. I'm just doing this, putting this out there for you guys in case you're looking at one of these and you need a bit more information. Now, I happen to be a fan of Bremont, but I try to keep my reviews as honest as possible and as unbiased as possible. So if there was something that I really disliked about either the watch or anything about the way it wears or feels, then I would be quick to say. I just happened to really like this package, and I feel like if you are the type of person that's sort of out and about on the road quite a lot, or you feel the need to time stuff, or you're working in the fitness industry or in any sort of industry that requires you to have a chrono, then this is a great package. And just before we wrap up, if you have any questions regarding this watch or any other watch in my collection of reviews, or any of the items in my other videos, if you have any questions regarding them, just drop them down in the comments. Let me know your thoughts on this watch. What are your thoughts on Bremont, the brand? I'd love to hear you guys' opinion. So yeah, any thoughts and questions, drop them down in the comments. I'll have more of these watch reviews coming soon, as I have a few more pieces that in my collection that I have left to review. So I will see you in the next one.